Is 1:05, so in the interest of expediency and time, I'm going to suggest we start. Amy will continue to let people in, and in terms of housekeeping, can I flag two things? One, we are recording the session, and two, there'll be a space for Q&A at the end, so any questions you've got for Julia that arise from this, drop your answers in the chat, and Nick, I think, is going to be fielding those. But welcome. It is December the whatever, the 9th. Welcome to the DCRC seminar series. This is a space for unpacking ideas, unlocking imagination, and sparking conversations. It is my very, very great pleasure to introduce Dr. Julia Scott-Stevenson, who is very well known to us, who will share research and creative practice findings from her Chancellor's Research Fellowship at the University of Technology, Sydney, in which she's exploring how might collectively engaging with immersive artworks inform our perception of climate crisis and our feelings of agency. Julia, I'm going to hand over to you, and then I'll stay quiet, and there you go.
Thanks, Tom. Sounds good. Hello, everybody. Really nice to see you all here. Some of you I know and some of you I'm new to, so yeah, I'm delighted to be sharing my work today. As Tom said, I'm a Chancellor's Research Fellow at University of Technology, Sydney, where my project is using creative practice experiments to explore how we can get audiences thinking through climate crisis using immersive media. And I've started with the framing of immersive media as a purposely vague term, so that part of the research can be exploring what kind of immersive media we're actually talking about and what might actually be useful in this instance. And my interest in this work has stemmed actually from my time at UWE and Digital Cultures Research Centre. I was there, or here, I guess, between 2017 and 2020, and was also part of the Southwest Creative Technology Network as an immersion fellow, and at the time was exploring immersive media and climate. And I was particularly interested in forms of immersive media that involved collective experience. So ones where audiences come together in space and actually experience projects collaboratively. So I am interested in virtual reality. I do think it's a really useful form, but it tends to primarily be a solitary experience, not always. And so I was interested in the forms that could allow us to get more users and more audience members together. So I'll share some slides. I apparently don't have permission to share. I did the first time I logged on, but this time I don't.
Bear with me. There you go.
Thank you. Great, here we go. So what I'll do is I'll talk through the two creative practice experiments that I've been working with so far. And this is the first one, and it's called Collective Visions. And it ran during Climate Action Week in Sydney in 2024. So that was May last year. And what it is what you can see in the image is what's called the UTS data arena. So it's a 360-degree screen room. Audiences can walk into the space and they're surrounded by about 4-meter high screens with projectors. And on one side, there's a QR code where audiences use their smartphone to scan the code. It brings up a browser window in which they're asked to craft a prompt describing their hoped for climate future. You can't see that here, but we had some guiding questions to help people think through how they might want to craft a prompt. And across the 5 days of Climate Action Week, images were generated on their phones, and then if they liked the image, they could send it to the screens. And across the 5 days, we generated this growing collage of generative AI images. I might show, oh, actually, no, I'll explain the research focus first. We had sort of two particular focuses. One was a social research focus, so looking at the collection of images that were actually created across the week and looking at the text prompts that were entered to create these and to see collectively what kind of future people were imagining. And then the second focus was exploring if there's some element of the collective experience that itself contributes to some kind of discourse of agency. So is there something about being in this space with other people, generating images, looking at what others have generated, discussing with the people in the space with you, whether it feels like they have some kind of sense of agency in the face of climate crisis? So on question 1 and the themes around what was coming out, I haven't finished fully crunching the data yet, but I do have some observations I can share. And then on question 2 and the collectivity, it was definitely clear from watching people interact that there was something to be gained from participating. Now, speaking about climate crisis, it can be difficult to latch on to a particular element of it to discuss. And it's often described, or when I discuss it with colleagues, we talk about it as this huge spectrum. And at one end of the spectrum, you have this overwhelming, complex, knotty, wicked problem that we can't even conceive of, let alone actually engage with or tackle. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have this hyper individualistic framing, which is it's all up to you and your individual behaviors. Why haven't you bought an electric vehicle yet? Stop using plastic straws and so on. And so, what I'm interested in with this work is where do we find somewhere on that spectrum, somewhere in the middle where participants and members of society can feel like they have some kind of agency in this space, but they don't feel like it's all on their shoulders. And there's a lot of people talking and writing about how collectivity might be a way towards that. Like, how do we feel part of a community? And that is one of the things that helps us take some steps towards this. So that's what I was interested in here. So let's have a look at a short video. Actually, I'm going to reshare it just to make sure I got the sound settings. Okay, is everyone getting sound for that?
Yeah.
Why should I be afraid to die? I belong to the If I go first, I'll wait for you there, on the other side of the dark waters. Be with me
So there's something a little bit unmoored about talking about futures. It can be a bit abstract, it can be a bit detached from the now and speculative without a kind of a framework. And suggesting that a project like this means that we can use it to predict a clear future is certainly not the point. I'm definitely not claiming that any individual image within this collage is containing any kind of truth. Certainly not claiming that AI is going to predict this future for us. I will dive into AI a little bit more later on, but just also initially for this, one part of the problematic element of using AI in a project like this, apart from all the much bigger problematic elements of AI, which I will get to, is that AI is generally, in its generative visual form, a little bit crap. It contains biases, it repeats those biases. There's kind of a look to all of the images that come out. It often doesn't quite get what you're going for with individual audience members coming in and prompting. It smooths over spiky edges. It averages things out. We know all of this. But the process itself is quite revealing. Many people commented on the difficulty of coming up with what they wanted to see. So we all know how to visualize climate apocalypse. We see it in popular media. We see it already in the world around us. But imagining and then describing what we want to see, it's both difficult to articulate in a concrete way, and it also involves some vulnerability and bearing our soul a little bit. Using a tool like generative AI shortcuts some of this difficulty in articulation because there's supporting guiding questions. Audiences could see other people's prompts rolling up one side of the screen with text. They could see the other images and get some ideas from there. And so that offers some of that framework that's needed. And the collective approach of bringing people into space together and seeing others' images also reduces a little bit of that vulnerability. You can see that other people have shared their hopes as well. And so maybe it makes it a slightly more supportive environment to do that. There's a very low barrier to participation here once someone has entered the space. Other forms of audience contribution can be off-putting to people often who believe that they're not creative. People often don't want to draw a picture or write a story, or they're intimidated by invitations to create something. And I'd been thinking about a project like this for a long time, about asking people to imagine their hoped-for climate future before generative AI was a thing. And then once Gen AI emerged, it kind of revealed itself as an obvious tool for something like this that was a really simple and quick opportunity for people to contribute. The framing of the question was really important. So not what do you think will happen, but what do you want? Something intentional. What is it that you would like to aim for? So that framing, I hope, seeds an initial idea of agency in the audience. It was also really important that we left space for climate grief. It's obviously entirely possible that people might have a hoped for idea, but also no real feeling that that will be achieved. So we didn't censor any images. There were certainly some submissions that engaged with this apocalyptic idea of a future, and we left those in there. But I was interested to see that across the spread, generally the hoped for future that was something representing a resilient and a thriving future was the overwhelming output. And I hope that and seeing that displayed was also in some way kind of effective for audiences to feel supported in that space. I was also interested to see how much audiences would actually take the prompt seriously. Because we weren't censoring images, there was always space for silliness, and you can probably see in some of the images, there are certainly some that don't seem like they would be specifically climate relevant, but we also left those in there. Generally across the board, people were good students, and I mean, I guess the framing of Climate Action Week really helps. Also, across the 5 days, right at the beginning, we started with maybe 3 or 4 guiding images on the screen. And in the early couple of days, people were producing work that you can kind of imagine. So things like we saw lots of solar panels and green spaces. But as the days went on and people became a little bit more creative, audiences would riff off each other's images, become a little more abstract, a little bit more inventive. So I think actually this one over here with the bottom left with the kind of globe shaped covered in windows, the prompt for that one was just one word. It was degrowth. I think this one with the pandas was one of my media students, and they were going for something like the animals are kind of fighting back, which I thought was interesting. And up here with the illustrated men in suits, that is fossil fuel executives crying after the world has banned fossil fuels. So we did start to get some more interesting inputs. And I think participating in a space like this was the thing that was kind of interesting for audiences rather than any particular content of any particular image. It also became a bit of a game for the audience to look at the rolling prompts in text and then try and match up which prompts connected to which image. So I'm hoping that this project in some way contributes to some sort of a collective imagination for audiences and a feeling that there are others out there that also have some resilient vision of a future. Some of those like more interesting images that started to come out as well. There were a lot of bees. People really like a future with bees in it. A lot of mushrooms, mycelium houses. We had some really lovely hybrid human plant creatures as well. So people did start to get really creative. So now I'll move on to the second prototype that I'm working on. It's a project called Future Echoes, which I'm developing with creative technologist Matt Hughes. And it's at prototype stage at the moment. We've shown a prototype at a festival in Sydney. And what it is a mixed reality documentary using mixed reality glasses, and audience members don the glasses, and in the space that they're in, they encounter volumetric recordings of women engaged or working in the climate space, talking about their visions for a resilient climate future. These envisioned futures are then revealed around them through 3D point clouds, and audience members can explore and walk around and through the space, through the interview recordings, and through the 3D images. The glasses we're using are called X-Real glasses. They're actually an older model, which is called N-Real before they changed the name. This is, I don't know if you, let me just turn my thing back on. This is what the glasses look like. They're pretty lightweight. And so being mixed reality glasses, they have clear lenses. Audience members can see the space around them. They can see other participants, but there is a lens in there that the additional media is being projected onto. And then it just has a cable that connects to an Android phone, which is where the content is streamed from. So these images are the shoot, one of the shoots that we did with the women. We had 6 Australian women ultimately. On the left is Lee Constable. She is a science communicator, a children's book author, a broadcaster. She also has a drag king alter ego called Milton Mango, who talks to Australian men about toxic masculinity and climate resilience. And then on the right there, you can see Arietta Rika. She is an Australian, Tongan, Fijian woman and also a poet. And so in the piece, we have Ari reading some of her poetry. And if you're interested in the, oh, hang on, let's go back. If you're interested in the setup, what you can see is we were also capturing it with a traditional digital camera. And then the depth cameras for the volumetric recording, we had 3 set up. So it's a bit hard to see, but there's one in front of Ari, just here, where the smaller kind of silver case, and then one at the back left of her. And then there's another one that you can't quite see that's hidden behind this other camera here. And we used a couple of different green screen locations and shot across 4 days of shooting, I think, to capture these interviews. And what we talked to the women about was what I like to call their climate origin stories. So how they got engaged in the climate space, and also so building on the Collective Visions project, but their hopes for the future, what they imagine a resilient climate future could look like. And when audience members put on the glasses, they see this volumetric representation of these women. So it looks a bit, I'll show you some images in a sec, but it looks kind of holographic a little bit, and they take on full size. So it's like having a full-size human in the space with you, but with a kind of glitchy aesthetic rendered over the top. So to avoid that kind of uncanny valley feeling. And they're positioned around the space. So each time a different woman starts speaking, she's in a different location, and audiences can move around as they look for where the women are. But essentially it unfolds, it's about 10 minutes long, and it unfolds like a 10-minute documentary as the women tell their stories. Then behind them, they have images that we generated using AI for the prototype. For the full version, we're moving away from AI and we'll be using a 3D artist. But currently the backgrounds were generated with 2D images through AI, and then we used a depth map algorithm to make them into 2.5 or 3D. So other characters that the audiences meet include Alana, who's awed by the intricacy and detail of a tiny bug, and Nadoka, who sees the challenge ahead as one of embracing the messiness of nature. We spoke to Danusha, who cares deeply about bringing minority communities along on the ride to resilience, and Devlina, who brings decades of on-the-ground experience to her insights across Australia and India. So some of the research questions I was interested in exploring with this project were including, what does it feel like to be in front of and addressed by a virtual person? So this feeling that they're taking up the same space that you are to some extent, and that they are directly addressing you, while you're still embedded in your physical surroundings with other flesh and blood people. And I'm interested to know if that feels different in some way from other forms of media. So there's a different kind of mode of attention happening here with a mixed reality project, in that audience members can attend to the space around them and to each other while they're in the project, which I think is quite distinct from VR, which transports you to quite a different virtual space. I'll show a short clip from the project. One of the quirks of mixed reality is that it's actually quite difficult to represent it in a 2D form, because it doesn't look like the 3D sensation, and you're either sort of fixed in space, which is not what the experience of it is, or if I show a screen recording from the glasses, then it gets really, really kind of wobbly. So what I'm going to show is a short clip from inside the Unity recording, so it's not too wobbly, but it's a bit more static.
So my ideal future would be a decolonized one. It would be one where we care more about our collective well-being as well as our individual freedoms and rights. You know, that we don't actually have a system where we think that someone's ability to make profit is more important than people's access to clean drinking water or housing or whatever it might be. All of these things that lead to a better social outcome also lead to a better environmental outcome and better economic or financial conditions for people. So that would be my ideal future. So that's easy. And I think we just crack on with that. But that's very ideal.
When, you know, in urban areas particularly, the main form of interaction that we have in nature is parks that are neatly curated, or how we see produce in supermarkets. You know, you have really perfect waxed apples that all look the same, or meat that's like packaged really nicely. You have your milk bottles that look consistently the same. And so in one sense, we're interacting with nature in a way that's really static and sameness. But if you actually sit out in nature and observe, it's actually messy and unpredictable in a really beautiful way.
So it's a little hard to get the sense of the depth of the background images, but they do take on quite a considerable amount of depth, and audiences could walk through the point clouds and explore them. So these images here are from the showcase that we held, where we demonstrated the prototype. It was at Vivid Festival in Sydney, which is a winter festival across Sydney, and we held a showcase at UTS. A creative practice showcase. So some of my colleagues were also showing VR projects and a couple of other pieces. So we thought it would be probably primarily industry audiences came, but we actually got quite a significant number of general public who came along too. It was really interesting to see the diverse ways that people responded to the project. So we had it set up in this quite small space. Usually we had 2 users at a time, but you can see here a couple of times we managed to get 3 into the space together. So that image on the left with the woman in the pink jumper in the middle, that's Arietta, the character, Australian, Fijian, Tongan woman. And so this was where Ari was seeing herself for the first time in this virtual space. In the middle, this is Alana, who was also seeing herself for the first time. We ran it over 2 nights, on a Tuesday night and a Thursday night. And it was the Tuesday night, we had a lot of responses about the technology. A lot of people saying, you know, wanting to know what the glasses were, wanting to understand how the point clouds existed and had been generated. And then on the Thursday night, a lot of the responses were around the content and the emotion and the story. So I'm not quite sure what the difference was there, but it was really interesting to see people had really diverse responses to the work. For people that had not had much experience with immersive technology before, say people that hadn't really tried VR or anything kind of immersive, we had to do a bit of sneaking up behind people and sort of whispering, you can look around, because the virtual people and backgrounds were positioned quite around the space. And so people would then be like, oh, right, there's someone over here right next to me. But the image on the right, for instance, you can see that's my kids experiencing the project. And they were immediately sort of leaping through point clouds and trying to hit things. And one of them was trying to eat one of the apples in one of the images. So there was a real diversity of ways to engage with the work, depending on what kind of experiences they'd had with immersive media before. It was also really interesting to see how audiences treat virtual humans. I showed the prototype on Friday at the PM studio, and we had some discussions with people in the space there too that really reflected this. And we do really tend to want to treat these virtual humans with the similar kind of respect that we do to living humans, in the sense that when an audience member is in the space and they're looking around for the next person who's speaking, for the prototype, we haven't got spatialized sound happening yet. So all the sound was coming from one direction. So you couldn't use the sound to locate where the person was coming from. We will use spatialized sound when we finish the project. And so often you'd find someone would be looking around, and if they discovered, as often happened, that they were actually standing in the person, they would always freak out and jump back. There was something that felt a little bit inappropriate about sort of standing inside a virtual human. And even for the people that are really familiar with immersive technology, initially, what they want to do is, stick their heads into the point clouds and look around and look at the person from behind. But fairly quickly, they resort to then returning to the front of the person, leaving an appropriate amount of space to be addressed by this person speaking. And similarly, when we were setting it up, when Matt and I were designing the space and we were positioning the characters around the room and saying, okay, we're going to put Alana over here and we're going to put Devlina over there. And then Matt would say, okay, I'm going to move Ari from here to here. And every time I would get out of the way so that this sort of virtual point cloud could pass me by, because it just felt inappropriate to be in the middle of the space while that was happening. So I'm really interested in how we treat these virtual characters, and also how we as audience members use our bodies in space. This has been a long research interest of mine. This image on the left is a report that I authored for some research with MIT Open Documentary Lab in partnership with IDFA Doc Lab on the Doc Lab Festival in 2023. So MIT has an ongoing partnership with IDFA, and I work with them, and each year we choose a different theme that we research at IDFA Doc Lab. And so for that year, the theme was embodiment, AI, and the perception of the real. And our primary focus was embodiment and how audiences use their bodies in immersive media, and how artists are thinking about using their bodies. And we really found that audiences are very interested and excited to inhabit space, and they are also quite able to be sophisticated in their understanding of who they are supposed to embody and why, in the sense that artists don't need to have a fixed position that they want audiences to be. Audiences are comfortable slipping backwards and forwards between taking on a character or being themselves in that space. And so that was really interesting to see, and pleasing to see that audiences can come with artists kind of on that exploratory journey. And then these images are a couple more stills from the project. So that's Alana at the top talking about walking on her local beach, Ari on the right reading some of her poetry, and Nadoka at the bottom talking about the kind of perfection of food that we expect. Some observations on the kind of the mode of attention that we have in a project like this is that the affordances of mixed reality glasses offer that kind of captured attention of the XR headset. So one of the things that a VR headset is really great for is that it really does capture your attention. You can't be kind of half looking at your phone while you're experiencing a VR project. And that persists with glasses like these. Even though you can see the space around you, nobody's picking up their phone and checking their messages while they're in a project like this. but it does allow engagement with the surrounding physical reality and with other participants. So because we didn't have spatialized sound yet and people had to look around to find where the characters were, we found that often the people in the space would help each other out and would tap the other person on the shoulder and say, look, they're over here. Or they might not have noticed that there was a 3D point cloud just over to the right of one of the characters. And so one person would say, hey, have you seen this image floating over here in space? So there's a shifting balance here between attending to the technological layers and also the surrounding environment. We also had comments from participants saying that they really appreciated being able to see the space around them. A couple of people who were a bit hesitant to participate because they said they really didn't enjoy VR found it much more grounding and that they felt more stable because they could see their feet, they could see the world around them. It certainly does, like many other mixed reality headsets, it does have a limited field of view. And that is a limitation of this kind of technology at the moment. And so, for instance, if you come up really close and want to explore the point clouds or the people, it becomes quite obvious when you're really close that there's a limited field of view in the glasses. And so we found that people would do a kind of a forward and back motion where they would come in to look at something and then they would move back where they could see more of the image in their glasses if they stood back a little more. Also, Matt and I could be hovering around the back of the space, kind of doing other things. Audiences can see us, but they're not focused on us. They're focused on the project. So the project didn't start out particularly to be focused on women in climate action. I was open to a range of characters, but it sort of emerged that way. And while I was seeking participants, I also started reading a lot more of the social research on what's happening in terms of climate understanding and appetite in Australia. And there's a social researcher who's quite well known there called Rebecca Huntley, who does a lot of community focus groups and has researched thousands and thousands of Australians and their understanding and of climate and kind of taking the temperature of their expectations of action. And she says that the messages on climate that we take the most seriously, and this is very unsurprising, is climate scientists. So the people who are most trustworthy on messaging on climate is climate scientists, but not everybody knows a climate scientist. And the second most trustworthy people when she surveys the public is young women, which I think is really interesting. And many a skeptical uncle or father has been converted to the climate cause by a young woman in their life. And so when I came across that, I kind of decided to lean into sticking with women as my interviewees. They're not all young women. One of the participants is in her 70s, but that's also just kind of how this project evolved. So at the moment, the piece itself is not interactive beyond audiences moving through the space. But we're now planning what that end interaction point might be. So when we move to the next iteration, we're planning a few experiments on how that could work. And some experimentation that we've undertaken so far is that we have set up the depth cameras in the space with the audience and tested out projecting the audience into the final scene with the other characters. The reason we're interested in doing that is because I'd like to see how the audience feel about inhabiting that final space with the background that is the kind of hoped for climate future of Arietta. And when we did the first test of that, it was myself in the space and Matt, my collaborator, and seeing ourselves projected into that world was quite affecting. It did feel like we were kind of, there was an additional layer in that virtuality happening. One thing I didn't do that I wish I did afterwards was that I didn't reach out and touch Matt on the shoulder. But I'm thinking that if I did and saw the mini human me reach out and touch Matt as well, that would add a level of materiality. And that's something I'm interested in exploring. How do we connect the materiality of that virtual space and the physical space that we're in through this project? While I've tested this with other people, others have suggested, what about doing it with some more set design and having some trees in the space, and then audience members need to go and touch them and feel them, and that could be an interesting thing to explore as well. So there's a number of questions to kind of answer around how that might play out. Why there are multiple people in there together? Do you need to interact with them in some way? Is there something material in that space that you need to interact with? Yeah, so those are the questions that I'm thinking through at the moment. And then finally, just connecting it back to collective visions in the first project and some idea of this possible tangible future. What is it that connects that slightly speculative future to something a little more concrete, to something that feels like we can get there? So those are open questions at the moment. I'm almost done, but I do want to speak to the kind of the AI question at the moment, which is, I think, a really big one. Let me just shift my windows here. So for the prototype for this project, we have been using, as you can see, generative AI for the backgrounds. And when we first, actually, let's move to one of those images. So when, and we were using the words of the women to feed into the generative AI system and develop these images, and then we would add a depth map over the top to give them depth. And what we did initially was I took an anecdote from Alana about walking with her mum when she was a child, and how her mum would point out whenever they saw these really intricate and lovely bugs about how wonderful the natural world is. And I took that entire anecdote verbatim and put it into the Stability AI, was the system we were using, and I got these images, and I was quite taken with them. They were pretty unlike most generative AI images I'd come across. And so we tried that with a few more of the anecdotes from the women, but actually we got one or two really good results, and the rest of them were pretty ordinary. So it took a little bit of tweaking to get better at prompting. I had also been quite clear that I wanted to be quite light touch on the AI generation. I didn't want to spend days generating thousands and thousands of images and then sifting through and, you know, tweaking and reprompting. I was trying to just go with the first few things that we came up with and being a little bit spontaneous with it. But that didn't, and we did stick to that mostly. But I had to get quite good at prompting to be able to know what to come out with. So we moved away from the verbatim and got a bit more specific with our prompts. The other thing that I'm sure many of you are aware that it was not good at was anything culturally specific. So for instance, when we were talking to Ari and about her wishes to take her children back to Fiji to see where her father grew up, it really can't do cultural specificity at all. And probably even more problematically, it can kind of make a simulation of Fiji in a way that a lot of people probably wouldn't notice anything wrong with. But having some insight into Fijian culture, you can quickly tell that it's not an appropriate representation of, say, a village or a traditional out costume or anything like that. So we really also had to move away from anything that attempted cultural specificity like that and go with fairly generic kind of tropical backgrounds and so on. And so already through this process, I was starting to feel a little bit sheepish about the use of AI. I was kind of thinking for collective visions for the first project, I really think it made sense. We weren't doing heavy amounts of generation. It was a quick tool that solved a need that we couldn't really do any other way. But for this project, coming from a background of documentary where no one has any budgets for anything, I was possibly making myself feel better about it by going, well, I don't have funding for a 3D artist. But I was quietly thinking, am I just not trying harder to pay a 3D artist to do this work? And then after we showed the prototype at Vivid, Matt came to see me and said that he didn't want to work with AI anymore. He was really concerned about the labor implications of it, and not knowing what kind of images had been trained, the model had been trained on, what was the copyright issues. And to be honest, I couldn't really argue with him. I'd been having a lot of those similar thoughts too. We had gone down the path of figuring out training our own models and using a local model as well that's not sending things to the cloud, and using solar batteries and so on. But ultimately, we were both having a lot of misgivings about the tools. And so in the end, we agreed that we would not use it anymore for this project. So it was a really useful prototyping tool for this first instance, but we're now going to seek funding to get a 3D artist on board for the next iteration. And that will also give us a little more control in terms of size and scale of the images. We could bring in a little bit of movement as well. Obviously, you can do that with AI, but the emissions intensity of that just gets even higher again. So that's where we're taking the next iteration. And I mean, AI and similar digital technologies is a side research interest of mine over time. And I've written before about data privacy and surveillance. And so all of those elements to do with the kind of tech companies' interests and massive expansion approaches are also huge, huge problems. So all of that had been feeding into why we were feeling uncomfortable about this, which is why we're now moving away from it for the next step. And of course, a climate project generally and the use of AI is a massive tension there that gets very difficult to unpick. There's a lot more I could say about the AI kinds of things, but I would love to have some more time for questions. So maybe I will stop there, and I'd love to hear any thoughts or comments.
Thanks so much, Julia. That was a lot to think about. So yeah, definitely that first. And then love to hear from anybody in the audience who may have a question. If you do, please feel free to raise your hand and then just unmute yourself, because you can speak. There's no need to write it into the chat. Mandy, hand up.
Hi. So yeah, thanks so much, Julia. Really great to hear about those projects. It's overdue. I've been wanting to hear about them. So yeah, I'm not quite sure. I think perhaps a little bit on collective visions. It's partly going back to the title, and I think this kind of issue, I felt like that kind of theme of immersive spaces as spaces for collective imagining and collective vision sort of seems like it's there in the second project, perhaps a little bit. But I guess I was wondering about collective visions. Were you able to do work with people around that business of how they had felt around the question of agency, and how the project had stimulated or not, their sense of agency, their sense of collectivity? And I just wondered if there's a little more to say about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. We haven't yet done any kind of formal audience research on it. We would like to. So the project does still show periodically in the data arena at UTS. So for Climate Action Week, it was mostly anecdotal. So I made it with the visualization developer at the data arena. His name's Thomas Ricciardiello. And the two of us were mostly like having informal chats with participants in the space. And so that was pretty informative in itself. There were people who were often surprised at the extent of how many other people had unusual and just diverse visions of what a future could be. I think there's often a sensation for people that they are a little bit alone in feeling that they either want some kind of different future or have some idea for one. So there was certainly a level of reassurance that participants seemed to be taking away from participating in that space. There was also a level of reassurance that came for people feeling like it could be something in which they could be creative or humorous, that it didn't need to be a completely earnest space always. So that was certainly interesting to see. The framing of when you show it really matters as well. So because it was Climate Action Week, people had walked into the space primed for something very climate focused. We showed it again, or a version of it, at the same showcase at Vivid Festival. So when I showed Future Echoes at the Creative Practice Showcase with colleagues, we also put up another version of Collective Visions, not in the data arena this time, and this time on a flat screen. So quite a large screen projected on one wall, but in a space where there were other projects on show in VR headsets. And the framing of the showcase was a little bit different. The theme for the whole of Vivid Festival was dreams. And we named our showcase I Dream of Reality. And we were asking, the prompt this time was more around, what do you dream of? And for that, it kind of went off the rails pretty quickly. People were still like, there was some interesting speculative ideas around futures that people dreamt of. A lot of it got very technological. So when you talk about futures in a more general sense, people start to imagine a lot of technology. And then also general public audience, not primed for climate. We got a few cats, and then once you get a few cats, you get a whole lot more cats. And then we got like a bunch of Beyonce and Taylor Swift. So the framing seems to really matter. Like, so in that instance, just letting people run wild with some generative AI was not useful, not particularly productive. It was a lot of fun, but I don't think it necessarily achieved anything.
Thank you.
Son.
Thank you very much. Julia, I really like the idea that about the using the AI that to lower the barrier that the people of different skill for creation can be part of it. That is a really excellent idea. That is very, very interesting that you are doing that. I am a climate scientist, and when you explained that your second project, I also echoing that what you're saying. We also have an immersive project here, and then we create that based on science for the immersive experience. Interestingly, that when we present the result, no one questioned about my science. Although that, yeah, you know that I'm kind of scientist. I got all the subjectivity when I create that immersive environment. But just like what you say, yeah, no one question about that, whether the science correct or not, but they're more in the experience. For this, that question that I come to you, that is, you do recognize that the gender biases related with your creation of the immersive environment and so on. Do you, although I agree that the people may be more agree with the young ladies that when they present the idea, do you worry about that certain group may be marginalized, and then they, you know that now our society have another big forces that really that skeptical about climate and so on, and then do we that doing like that we create a bubble that we are in the bubble, we are very happy, but the people outside the bubble that we are not engaged with them or marginalize them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, I mean, that's really interesting that you say that people generally trust your kind of communication of information as a climate scientist, and the wider community generally does. We are so far past the kind of need to push back on climate denialists. I think that's a common misconception now with climate communication, is that, you know, there are some people that are like, oh, we still need to kind of address the people that are not on board. And actually, we're beyond that. There aren't that many people left anymore. And actually, the bigger issue is the kind of the feeling of apathy or the feeling of a lack of power. It's people who understand what's happening but think there's nothing I can do. So that, I think, is the much more important group to engage with. And then in terms of who I'm speaking to with a project like Future Echoes, I think the 6 women that we have are a really diverse group of women from ethnicity, from background, from age as well. And so I do think we've managed to capture quite a range there. I don't think necessarily saying opening it to you know, men aren't going to be spoken to because there are only women so far in this piece. I think also, as it stands at the moment, there are 6 women. We're thinking about future iterations where we open it up to actually capturing more people in space, and that would be very much an open invitation, like bringing audiences in, capturing their stories. And if we did something like that, there would be no restrictions on who we take. It would be, you know, who is here and would like to contribute. So there's an opportunity to have much broader stories as part of this. Also, in terms of communicating to different people, the question of what we're actually communicating is a really big one. And something I spoke about a bit on Friday at the PM studio is this idea that all climate media needs to be really instrumental in what it's asking the audience to do. And I'd actually really like to push back on that as a kind of need for climate media. What I'm really doing with a project like this is contributing to a much broader socio-ecological imagination. It's contributing to this sense that there is a community that people can be part of and that have some shared vision of a hoped-for future. There's a lot of fantastic climate media out there that has a very clear call to action at the end, and that's really important to have and useful, but that's not what this project is doing. I think there's a lot of art that can be really impactful without needing to say that that's what it's trying to do. I mean, also in an academic or higher education environment, obviously we all need to report on our impact. So that is a kind of a line I have to run a little bit of trying to have it both ways, trying to say that, yes, I think I'm having impact with this project, but no, I don't want to measure it in that way. And so there's definitely a wanting to, have my cake and eat it too on that front. But I do think that art projects sometimes need to double down a little bit and claim that space for suggesting that they are contributing to this kind of community sense, this broader imagination of what is happening without necessarily measuring at the end, okay, how much do you feel like you want to go hug a tree now that you've seen this project? And I know I'm being a little bit flippant. I don't mean to be quite that with that, but I think there's a lot of research out there that talks about, comparing immersive media with, say, 2D flat screen media, and which is more effective at encouraging a kind of care for the environment. And those studies are really useful. But also, again, I'm trying to do something a little bit different here, but I can see that I am trying to kind of have it both ways, which is maybe a little bit cheeky.
Anybody else have any questions or comments that they'd like to add? Fidel, hi.
Hi, thank you. Very, very interesting. The projects and the presentation. Thank you. I think the question I had, and probably you already kind of have answered with the previous response, is how people who attend to these experiences can feel that they are doing something, that they are having an agency, that they are getting, I don't know, a collective imagination, reaction, dreaming together for a better world, whatever. But how much of that runs the risk of distract with a kind of a gimmick from real actions, from real collective organization of, fighting for better world, for anti-pollution demonstrations, etc. So I'm not saying, and I think your answer is clear, is, your project is not about that, but how much can be a distraction from political action, embodied in the city political action, or how would you play it that it contributes to that as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. It's certainly a risk, particularly with immersive media, that there's a bit of a bells and whistles that looks a bit fantastical and does detract from the internal message, which is very true. And for some people who certainly for people that had very minimal experience with immersive media, when I showed this, for instance, a colleague of mine from social sciences who had never experienced VR before did the prototype and came out at the end just kind of looking a bit woozy and said, I thought that was really fantastic, but to be honest, I wasn't listening to the first half of it because I was so disoriented by point clouds and turning around and trying to find what I was looking at. And then the second half is when I started listening to the content. So that's a really important finding and something that I need to really consider in terms of what kind of experience the audiences I'm going to be showing it to have. And I do probably need to work on the introduction a little bit to lead people in a little more slowly to the content. And it might be the case that the interaction doesn't need to be significant because what is interesting is the stories from these women talking about the diversity of things that they've been doing. And one of them is talking about colonialism, and another one of them is talking about, imagining the end of capitalism. So actually, maybe it's entirely possible that we don't need people to do something or to physically do something in the piece that makes them feel like they have agency in this space, because as you point out, the personal capacity to engage is much more impactful around questions of democratic participation, around activism, rather than specific activities like getting solar panels on their house, for instance. So it may actually be that just hearing what they're speaking about could be just as impactful as asking people to do something. And so, yes, that's another tricky line to run, and I'm not sure there's a clear answer on where to land on something like that. And it's probably the answer to that is that it's more than one project. Like one project might take one approach to it, and a different project would do something else. Of course, there's certainly no one artistic project that is going to solve this or be the right answer for what makes any one individual decide that they want to contribute or participate more.
Okay. No, I imagine something along those lines. Thank you very much. Very interesting work.
Thank you.
Okay, we've reached 2 o'clock. So I'm just going to say thanks everybody for coming along today. It's really great to see so many new faces, and thanks so much to Julia for that. That was really fascinating. And so you'll know this is recorded. It will be going up on the Digital Cultures Research Centre YouTube channel. There's also going to be on the Pervasive Media Studio channel a copy of Julia's talk from last Friday, which you can check out, which I guess it's fundamentally different. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a similar content, probably different questions,
Yeah.
one or two different clips, but yeah.
And just to let you all know, this is the last one of these this term, but we will be back with more next term. So we'll let you all know when the next one comes around. And I guess just to say thanks ever so much and have a great break.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks, everyone.